In 1914, the back of the $10 bill printed by the Federal Reserve in the United States of America contained a scene where hemp was being plowed in a field and being carted off to a factory somewhere in York County, Pennsylvania. And that was 1914. And at that point in time, hemp was a major agricultural crop in the United States and around the world. But then only a few years later, in 1937, hemp was effectively outlawed and made an illegal product. So I'm here to talk to you about how industrial hemp pioneers are making America hemp again. I'm Bob Hoban, and I'd like to talk to you about the evolving basis for the industrial hemp industry. I'd like to talk to you about the products and the uses of industrial hemp derivatives and manufacturing processes. I'd like to talk to you about some of the challenges and hurdles that occur in the industrial hemp space, both legally and from a policy perspective. I'd also like to present you with a range of opportunities as you consider potential participation in the industrial hemp industry. In 2014, the United States Congress passed something called the Agricultural Act of 2014, also known as the Farm Bill. If you wanted to look up the text of the Farm Bill, you would just Google section 7606 of the Agricultural Act of 2014. It's very short, but what the Farm Bill does is it allowed for the first time a definition of industrial hemp, which is different than marijuana. It also allowed the commercial production, manufacturing, cultivation, and distribution of industrial hemp products across the United States. Now, the caveat was that it allowed it for agricultural, scientific, and market-based purposes. In other words, Congress passed a bill that was intended to study the marketplace of hemp, but not to limit it to simply an agricultural academic study, but rather a study of the marketplace, hence the term market-based research. Now, the Farm Bill specifically amends our Federal Controlled Substances Act to exclude industrial hemp. In other words, industrial hemp has not been previously defined, or had not been previously been defined under federal law. And for the first time, it had under the Farm Bill. And what it did was it accepted it. It made an exemption to the Controlled Substances Act for industrial hemp that was lawfully produced under the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill empowered state departments of agriculture. It empowered universities around the country to basically test the marketplace and to create a marketplace for industrial hemp, whether it's a viable crop, whether the uses and technology that exist today would cause it to have commercial value, etc. Now, what is the difference between marijuana and industrial hemp? Well, the Farm Bill, for the first time, defined that. Legally defined as the difference in THC percentage. 0.3% THC. 0.3% THC is the threshold. That's the line in the sand, if you will, between marijuana and industrial hemp. It's the same plant, it's the same genus and species, but the THC content is the only distinguishing factor under the Farm Bill and under the law. Now, the Farm Bill created a presumption that state legal hemp meets the definition so long as it's below 0.3% and so long as it's done in participation and conjunction with a Department of Agriculture and or a university. The Farm Bill took what was a dead industry in the United States. As I mentioned earlier, it was one of the top 5 agricultural commodity crops in the world, and certainly the United States. The breadbasket of America, states like Kentucky and Tennessee, grew hemp. It was their number 1 and number 2 cash crop for many, many, many years. This renewed the hemp industry in the United States. So going on 4 seasons of cultivation in the U.S. for the first time since the 30s, which was renewed again in the 40s for the Hemp for Victory campaign, which was a World War policy effort. But besides that point, they outlawed it, and there was no more production. So we took production from about 1,500 acres in year 1 to 3,000 acres in year 2 to 6,000 acres. To last year, we had over 20,000 acres US-wide. That's a pretty significant leap, and it shows you the power of what industrial hemp can do for an agricultural economy. Now I go back to marijuana versus hemp again, because what is the hemp industry? The hemp industry, again, it's the same plant. And it has the same components of marijuana, just different ratios of those components. For example, THC. It has THC, as I mentioned earlier, just small amounts of it. But what you lack in the THC concentration in one plant can be made up for when you plant hundreds of acres of that plant. Another commonality with marijuana, being the same genus and species, is that it contains cannabinoids. And there are over 88, if not 100 plus known cannabinoids in the cannabis plant that interact with an endocannabinoid system in the human body. And those have really created an industry in and of itself for extraction of oils and capsules and tinctures. But marijuana and hemp were rolled into one definition of marijuana back in 1937 under something called the 1937 Marijuana Tax Act. And what happened in 1937, based on a variety of social, political, and economic reasons, marijuana, spelled with an H, marijuana, and industrial hemp were rolled into one definition. There was, however, a subtle distinction that was made in the law. Marijuana doesn't define the entire cannabis plant from its roots to its top as something that's controlled or illegal, but rather marijuana is defined as only the tops of the plant. So the high stems, the leaves, the flowers, the resins that are on the top of the plant, but also the resins that are on the remainder of the plant. And what you'll find is that industrial hemp plants typically do not have a lot of the resin on the stalk going down, because when you craft genetics for particular ways to produce products from the cannabis plant, you generate a plant that puts all of its energy into flowers or perhaps stalk or perhaps seeds for the variety of uses that the industrial hemp plant can add. Now, the CSA definition of marijuana from 1937, which remains unchanged to this day, excludes the mature stalks. So that plant that I described, the top part of it, above 0.3%, is marijuana. Today, has always been marijuana under the Controlled Substances Act definition, but the mature stalks don't count as marijuana. The materials from the mature stalks, the fiber, the outside, the hurd, the thick material that's used for building materials and can also be processed and used for extraction of cellulose and lignins and sugars and the like, which are the building blocks for other products that we'll talk about in a few moments. The sterilized seeds were never a controlled substance. And seed oils and cakes, not CBD or cannabinoid oil, but seed oils and cakes are always something that are not controlled substances. And I mentioned briefly, and I won't dive into this deeply, but the historical underpinnings had a lot of racially insensitive social commentary underpinnings as it related to why marijuana and hemp were rolled into one. So today, I pose the question, do we have a CBD industry in the United States? Or do we have an industrial hemp industry? And that's an interesting point, because what we've found is that people that plant industrial hemp have used or borrowed, perhaps, extraction technology from the marijuana field, which was also borrowed from the natural products and the essential oils world, to extract those resins from the flowers and highlight a prominent cannabinoid called cannabidiol, CBD. And you've probably heard of or seen CBD, and it's certainly the cash product that comes out of the industrial hemp materials today, although that's rapidly changing. Once we get past this notion that we have to sell CBD or other cannabinoid extracts, and we use the entire plant, the fibers, for rope, for textiles, the hurd for building materials, and the extracted sugars and lignins and cellulose for fuels and graphene and the building blocks of plastic. Once we get to that level and we're beginning to use seed and seed varieties that can utilize the whole plant versus just the resins from the flowers, we will have truly moved from just a CBD industry to an industrial hemp industry. So what are the products and the categories of products that exist with industrial hemp? We've talked about the historical uses, textiles, soap, rope. Modern uses include things that I've already mentioned. Papers, textiles, but cottonized textiles, softer than your sort of traditional industrial hemp materials. Foods, high in protein and omega-3s. Foods that are basically replacing the fish oil market, because the fish oil market, as you've read probably, is going down because people feel that the oceans may not be the most clean places to derive their omega-3s and their proteins from. So they're replacing that with industrial hemp-derived oils and food products. Plastics. We see the development of bioplastics and plant-based plastics around the country and around the world, and industrial hemp is a major driver behind that evolution. We look at body care products or cosmeceuticals. We look at construction materials. There's a specific brand of a construction material called a hempcrete, but the idea is that you take the hurd and then you chop it up and you mix it with a lime or a proprietary mixture, and then you fill a form and it solidifies. And I've been in many hemp houses and hemp buildings, and I'm very excited about the possibilities, even just the boutique possibilities of hemp-based building materials, let alone the fact that we can make drywall that doesn't retain moisture, that doesn't grow mold from industrial hemp products, and paper it with industrial hemp paper. These are the exciting things that we're seeing coming down the pipeline, let alone the protein that's available based on using it as a livestock feed, which is done in Europe and has been done in Europe for many, many, many years, and that's slowly but surely going to be accepted into the US. And of course, the supplement world, the natural products world. You look at supplements, whether they're capsules or tinctures or the like, think about the natural products industry with echinacea and products like vitamin C and products that supplement your diet. The cannabinoid extracts that we're seeing, CBD is the most prominent one, but of course every other cannabinoid is being isolated and formulated with other natural compounds to create great supplements. And again, biofuel. Let's not lose sight of the fact that Henry Ford built a vehicle decades and decades ago, which was made out of hemp, but also ran on hemp fuel. So if you think about ethanol based on that brown corn that's government subsidized in the Midwest, what if you could do it with a plant that you could use for 10, 20, 30 other products immediately? That's game-changing stuff right there. And then that's just in the US. Think about the international opportunities when we're already seeing the emergence of a global cannabis economy. This global cannabis economy is off the charts to this day, where you're seeing products moved around the world, trade and commerce, imports and exports, all over the EU, Latin America, Australia, and of course the United States, although our political and legislative structures are a little bit different than the rest of the world. Look at the different sectors that the hemp plant will support and can support: food and supplements, the wellness industry, agricultural products, and industry, pure industry, industrial hemp. Now, we talked about the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill made industrial hemp legal. But what it didn't do was create a scheme where it was regulated. And I don't want to get in the weeds too much about that, but when something's legal, that carries with it, is it criminal behavior or not? Industrial hemp was legal so long as it was within the parameters of the Farm Bill. But is it regulated? Are the products that come out of that industrial hemp plant, are they regulated? In other words, what if I'm going to put something in my body? When I put other things in my body, food, supplements, etc., I know that the FDA has probably looked at those, or there's a company with an FDA registration so that those products can be distributed. But does that exist with industrial hemp? The answer right now is no. And that's because of the murky situation involving not so much the legality, but the regulated aspect of the plant. If the plant is going to be used to feed animals or human beings, then those products need to be regulated. So we see state by state picking up that responsibility and filling the void where the FDA has stood back and said we're not going to regulate these products right now because frankly, they don't know what to do about it. They wish it would go away, or so it would seem, but it's here to stay. Now, there's many challenges and many hurdles as it relates to the industrial hemp industry. The first is that the DEA, our Drug Enforcement Administration, has interpreted the Farm Bill very, very narrowly. It has interpreted so narrowly that it effectively suggests that industrial hemp is not legal. But Congress clearly and completely intended for this plant, industrial hemp grown within those parameters, to be a legal, commercialized product. And they've written legal briefs to that effect, backing up that notion. In fact, the DEA's own lawyers have written briefs agreeing with the interpretation that Congress and the industry would have. But it's very difficult to get that to become a public sentiment. And there's a little bit of a back and forth that's historically gone on between the DEA and Congress as it relates to industrial hemp. Back in 2004, the Hemp Industries Association took on the DEA and won a case where they tried to eliminate any hemp products, even if they contained a small trace of THC. And that court came out in favor of the HIA and said that even trace amounts of THC from industrial hemp are legal products. And then fast forward to 2014, Congress makes it entirely legal. In fact, creates an exception to the Controlled Substances Act. Then what happens? The DEA says, yeah, but only for these limited purposes, grain and fiber. And Congress says, no, wait a second. That's not what we intended. So what did Congress do? Congress went out and passed a spending bill. In other words, DEA, you cannot spend $1 enforcing industrial hemp as if it's a criminal enterprise, because it's not. We've legalized it. Well, the DEA didn't stop there. The DEA got together with the USDA and created a policy memo. And that policy memo, called the Statement of Principles, also narrowly defined what was legal and what was not based on Congress and the words that Congress had adopted. And Congress said, wait a second, we already told you not to do this. And they did it again. Congress went out and they put together another spending limitation that was even broader on Congress, on the DEA. And then the DEA responded by creating a drug code rule which confused and chilled the industry. As we sit here today, that struggle over industrial hemp between Congress and the DEA still exists. Although I would say our Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell from the state of Kentucky, and several of his Kentucky brethren are moving forward on legislation that would make it absolutely 100% clear that industrial hemp is not marijuana, it's not a controlled substance, and it shouldn't be regulated as such. The problem with the DEA's interpretation of the law is that's not what the law says. But Customs and Border Patrol follows not the law, but the DEA's interpretation of the law. The FDA follows not the law, but the DEA's interpretation of the law. So you see the struggle, you see the back and forth over a plant that's not only harmless because of its low THC levels, but so beneficial to so many with such great possibilities. Yet, we see that moving forward, and Mitch McConnell's bill is plowing forward this year and is anticipated to be rolled into the renewal of the Farm Bill, which would expand the uses of the industrial hemp plant. A couple of other challenges to note. If you're a farmer and you're using federal water from a reservoir or the like, can you use that water if the water agency, the water district, is using the DEA's interpretation and saying you're growing an illegal plant so you can't use this federally controlled water? Creates challenges for farmers. What about funding? What if I'm a farmer and I want to get a loan from my bank, as I typically do with other crops? Can I get funding? Can I get a loan? Can I go out and get a bank account? Can I go to a lender and get money to do what I want to do in the industrial hemp industry? There's challenges because of what? The DEA's interpretation of the law. Also, some other challenges. Equipment and processing technology needs to be improved. It doesn't exist at a level that would create mainstream commercial technologies yet. although it's getting there very, very quickly. And finally, I would suggest very strongly that farmers like to plant something called certified seed. They like to plant it because they know what yield they're going to get within a very specific range. They know the germination rate. And by the way, certified seed typically comes with something that's also critical for farmers: crop insurance. So we'll see the evolution of using clones, borrowed marijuana technology, although it's used in many plant fields, to a certified seed-based economy in the agricultural sector around industrial hemp, and that will be a game changer as well. So where are the opportunities? The opportunities lie in foods. Foods, whether it's the hull, the dehulled seed, the hearts of the hemp hearts that have high levels of protein and omega-3s, the crushed shells, which have enormous protein potential for animal feeds, whether it's plant matter in its raw form. Cannabinoids and those extracts, CBD, CBN, CBG, so forth and so on, being isolated, being recombined, being reformulated. Those products exist in the marketplace and have a high price point and are continuing to increase sales, but we're starting to see a little bit of a plateau there. The food element is where we're starting to see a huge upward shot in terms of trajectory as it relates to the grain market. The seeds, as I mentioned before. Look at FDA medicine as a trend. While a hemp farmer and a processor in today's unregulated environment is not likely to become a pharmaceutical producer of cannabis-based medicine, what it can do is it can develop technology, it can gather data, it can build genetics and other related technologies and license or sell that to an FDA-regulated pharmaceutical type scenario. Plastics. This is the most exciting thing that I've heard about, and that has a lot of people very, very excited because it's happening around the world. Latin American countries are building bioplastic building facilities, and that will include industrial hemp-derived materials. And of course, building materials that I touched on earlier. Now, we need investment in the infrastructure, the processing infrastructure, so that more farmers will plant hemp for other purposes besides just extracting the cannabinoids. And the way that we get that additional infrastructure to manufacture and process the hemp plant is when we get to a critical mass of biomass. In other words, when we have about 65 to 75,000 acres nationwide, you'll see mainstream investment into processing as we're starting to see it trickle in little by little right now. And that will be a game changer for the hemp industry. This has occurred across the European Union. It's beginning to occur across Latin America, and we're seeing it in the US as well. So in conclusion, that was a fast and furious coverage of what's happening with industrial hemp. But it's important to understand the evolving basis for the industry from a legal and policy perspective and the things that people are doing with this plant from a technology, processing, and manufacturing perspective. This plant truly has the ability to resuscitate ailing agricultural economies across the United States and other places around the world. We talked about the products and the uses of that. And what's beautiful about industrial hemp products and uses is you're plugging those products into mainstream distribution channels already. At some point, it will be besides the fact that these products come from industrial hemp. It's just a better, more viable product to use to produce these materials. We talked about the regulatory challenges and the opportunities. And with those things in mind, we can truly make America hemp again. Thank you.